Hey everyone. Before we start our episode today, we were saddened to learn of the passing of Sydney Bray, who is the mother of James Holley, our guest today. I wanted to dedicate this episode in her name and encourage you to donate to the Lupus Foundation, if possible, as we have, to remember her. I did not know Sydney, but as the mother of James, she's a hero to many, which I think you'll find in this podcast. So, thank you.
The softness comes from not wanting to put the work in, whether it's the research that they need to have or wanting to put the work in to take that step forward and really, make sure they're fighting for the right reasons and the right causes, and you're not just out there to be out there.
Hey everyone, this is Mark Goldberg here, and welcome to the very first episode of Certacast, which will be our ongoing podcast series where we bring in interesting friends, customers, partners, and talk about different things going in the world. Some of it will be relevant to what we're specifically doing at Certa. Some of it will be relevant to what we're trying to do in the community. Some of it will just be fun. And someone who fits all of those different boxes for our first episode, we have a personal friend of mine, James Holley, who is also an author, and we will be talking about his book, which is right behind me a little bit today. James, thanks for joining me today.
Hello, my friend. Great to be with you.
It's awesome to see you, man. So let's just take a second and talk about where we got to meet each other and where this friendship was formed. So, James, you and I worked together at Dun & Bradstreet, where, we kind of led the way in establishing the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. And then I was lucky enough for James to help co-chair with me or executive sponsor with me the first ERG that was at Dun & Bradstreet as well.
Yes, which for me was a very long time coming, right? I I had to write a book about it before we could get moving, but you were a true ally. And I think, I've heard a lot of things in my time, and I just think we connected so quickly because you weren't trying to be believable. I mean, you did your research, you did what needed to be done. And I don't think, allies come to that extent, but I felt a friendship brewing based on something big that we were trying to accomplish together. So, the funny thing is I had some conversations with people that I don't usually have conversations with, after the book was first written. So you guys were in the place of trying to put together the ERG, and I was trying to kind of make some noise for everybody to hear a little bit at the end of the day. So it just ended up being a great connection, and they're still trying to do some really good things. It's a lot to try to uncover and try to get to where you are, because we know this is systematic and it's been around long before, a lot of us were as well. But I really felt good about, what we were trying to do, and hoping that businesses continue to do it. And I've started a business where that's part of my work now, helping companies build ERGs and talking about diversity in a real way, right? I'm not going to drop, 20 degrees on you, but I have experience in ways that most can't really fathom at the end of the day. So I found a way to build myself in the process of that, and, not get bitter in the process, but understand the power that it's going to take from me to get to where I really wanted to be. And I think writing the book after overcoming it and becoming a senior director, that gave me the power that I needed, and a bit of being able to, release some of that stuff that just builds up for so long, and kind of, someone asked me the other day, and I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but you know how it is when we talk. They asked me to come back to the Bethlehem Area School District, which I was with for 5 years, to work with the board, because they wanted to start a diversity and inclusion committee as well. So we were going through some of the training, and one of the members, who was a white guy, said, how do you feel going through that? And I said, when I deliver at the businesses, it's empowering because they want to know, and they want to get better, and they realize that there are things they can do. I said, but when you're going through the training, at times it's like, ripping that Band-Aid off or opening old wounds. So that was something I noticed, and I've done a lot of sessions for different companies, but sitting in on one and going through the training when they're asking the questions, you continue to walk yourself back through those steps. And, it's been a really long journey, but I think I've gained so much in the process. And, even in the little bit of time that we got to kind of know each other, we connected in a way that shows that it really doesn't matter, who you are or what you look like.
That's one of our connecting pieces, right? Trust the process. We're both the Philly guys trying to
Yes.
believe the process will work despite evidence that maybe shows the opposite over the last couple of years. One of the things I think was so eye-opening in the beginning, James, is probably like any ally, I came in and in a couple of years I make big change, and then kind of look, and as you started sharing your story and thinking we understood what we changed and thinking understood realities, and then hearing your 18-year journey, right? And listening to what you dealt with, right? And the realities you faced and the path that you laid. And I think it was, one of the things that was interesting is there was like different levels of learning, right? You had other, and you and I talked about this, you had younger people of color who I think when you shared your experience, as passionate as they are, it's like, oh, that's a whole nother level than what I experienced. And I think for a lot of people who want to be allies, we know of certain realities, and maybe it's just you need to hear it out loud. But when you hear it out loud, it hits you in the face like a bucket of cold water, right? And I think that's what's so exciting about the change that comes now. But you said something else that I kind of want to latch onto, which is the change that you're seeing in the world, right? The great resignation is part of this. This younger generation, and we've talked about this, James, when we were trying to roll out stuff. You had to walk through being accepted and were able to try and push for equality. And that took so long because of obstacles that were in your way. Now we have a generation that is saying, I will not accept less than. This is what you will do, or you will not have top talent, right?
Right.
And how have you seen that impact your business, hiring practices, et cetera? And what do you think is important with that as we move forward?
I think, you see the differences in generations where, I was a guy, if you would have told me ages ago that there was a possibility, that Obama would be president, I would have laughed at that conversation as a young fella growing up. And I think, even the generation before us would say, well, you guys didn't listen enough either. I think the difference is there is a bullishness now about this newer generation, and because things are a little bit more connected as far as the youth, and while racism is still there, I think they view each other a little bit differently. They don't see the real issues that are out there, so they don't see the real problems. And I think if you want to stand on that pedestal and speak for everybody, then even myself as a guy who delivers this information to others, I am always trying to soak more in and educate myself. And sometimes what you read and see does upset you again, as I talked about with the earlier wounds that open back up. But a lot of them have not even experienced what I did, coming up in the corporate world with multiple companies that I dealt with, and continuing to realize that no matter how hard you worked, no matter what data was there to back the fact that you were the next in line, it just wasn't going to happen. And they could tell you whatever they wanted to at the end of the day. Now they want answers, and real ones, and at times pushing that hard. I joke and say they're bullish and soft, at the same time, which is pretty unbelievable. But the softness comes from not wanting to put the work in, whether it's the research that they need to have or wanting to put the work in to take that step forward and really, make sure they're fighting for the right reasons and the right causes, and you're not just out there to be out there.
So speaking of reading and, you know, putting in the research, right? I have in my hand the Black Handbook for White Corporate America, right? Which I encourage any of our listeners or followers, go out and get it. James, where's the best place to get the book?
It's on the publisher site, which is Zebris. It's XLIBRIS.com, or you can find it on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, any online bookstore. It's doing a little bit of traveling as of late.
Look, from my seat, right, I look at a book like that and I can read through the journey, and I think what takes me back, what really stopped me in my tracks, right, is not just your journey and not just your composure, right? You know, you and I have had this conversation before. I look at you in awe because I think I would have been thrown out of the buildings with some of the things you were able to deal with. And I just don't think that, you know, most people could emotionally deal with, you know, what your journey was. But to have the courage to put it down to paper, right? And put it out there and then go back, you know, to the company you worked at for 20 years and you delivered it with such kindness, right? Like even then it could have been something like, you see, like this is what I went through. But even then, when you delivered it to us and that first time you went over your book, it was such, you still were just trying to help people learn. And even I think some of the people on that call probably didn't realize that they may have been at some point some of the antagonists in the story, right? Even though they're saying the right things now, right?
Right.
Talk to me about that journey and what gave you the courage or why that was so important, because you shared some real truth there.
I think, there comes a time where you look for change and then you hope for change. And then another, while goes by and you realize that change just isn't happening. And after years and years of doing high end work and really performing, what I tried to get out of my head is things that couldn't be said to me, right? You're not getting it because you're black, whatever it may be. I didn't want those things to cloud my mind, whether they were real or not. I needed to continue. But when you continue to stack the deck with everything that you're asked to do, at that point, you feel powerless. And, obviously, I'm a father of 7. So, you take a whole lot more than you usually would at times when you have that much responsibility at the end of the day. But as they got older, and I thought about what I wanted for them, I realized that I had to be bold, not to point fingers at individuals, because most of the microaggressions and things that go on, they're not done purposely. It's self-imposed from a life of seeing things the way we've all seen them, right? So I'm not upset with you about that. But if it's easier for you to do that, if it's easier to have those conversations, or you're just happy that I was the guy that was left to pick for the basketball team, but I can't go back to home with you for the cookout in the backyard, you feel like you're put in place to do exactly what they may think that you're good at or the best at, and you want to grow and continue to get better as well. But if you do that, what will come from it? So I wanted to take, just a handbook approach, right? Many of us don't, we sign them and sometimes don't even look at them. So I thought, something small that gives them some real understanding of how it feels, not just the loneliness, but how exhausting it is to put that cape on every day and try to be someone that you're not really sure of, but you're sure that that's who they want. So you start to question who you are, day over day, and it can be exhausting in that regard.
It's always interesting to me. I said this, especially when John Lewis passed. You look at someone as brilliant as that, and you go, "My goodness, what could he accomplish for the world if he didn't have to focus on
Right.
such bullshit?" And you're someone who I have the same type of feelings for, where I look at you and I go, man, such a great guy, but what could he have accomplished if he didn't have to deal with such bullshit? And, it's something that in the current world, it sticks out to me. And there's actually 3 topics that I've seen that are very similar that I see converging. It's neurodivergence, it's in the LGBTQ community, and it's in the POC community, right? And whether you call it masking, whether you call it code talking, whether you call it showing a different persona, we have different words for it depending on which group we're
Yeah.
talking about, right? But it's the same thing. It's this, I'm supposed to bring this different version of me, or I have to speak a different way. I have to act a different way to be successful. I think, one of my favorite things since I've come to Certa is that my leader here, the CEO of Certa, what he just says to me, my introduction, James, I don't even know if we got to catch up with this. I made a rap video about my family and the software, and that was my at the all hands. That's what we played. And what's
Excellent.
funny about
Excellent.
it is I said to the CEO at one point, because he likes the fact that I could freestyle. It's a fun little talent, right? But I said, hey man, if you want me to rap at these events and you think that's cool, like I'll totally do that. And his response was, he was like, no, I just want the authentic you. Like if that's what you want to do, awesome. If that's not it, that's cool too. And so one of the things I'm really hyper focused on as a leader, both at work and trying to be in the community, is how do we empower people to be their authentic selves? I was talking to one of my closest friends, and seeing that in him. So he was talking about some of his struggles and what's going on at work and how he can advance. And I basically flat out said to him, because he struggles to lead at work, and I
Right.
said, every time we've ever been on a team together, man, you're the QB, you're the captain, you're the one who's yelling at us in the fourth quarter. You're like a natural leader. And he said to me with no pause, he's like, yeah, but that's not the guy they want to see at work. And so one of my things is I was like, well, then maybe you're not at the right place. Like if that's not the guy they want to see, because why wouldn't they want to see the best you? So I guess, that's more of a statement than a question. But James, how do we continue? How do we, like, you and I always talk about, it's not just about, we're not just trying to do this for us, right?
Right.
We're actively trying to say, step on my shoulders,
Right.
get further than we were able to do it. So how do we set the example for the next generation to say, you don't have to code speak. You don't have to mask. You be yourself, because yourself is actually the person that we want the most.
I think, the belonging piece. When I talk about diversity, inclusion, and belonging, because that's the bigger piece. We can put everything in place that we need to make it look real sexy, right? But the reality is, what are the moves that are made afterwards? So we get caught up in this spin, and I'll take it back to a point that you made earlier that was perfect. What could you have been? Imagine being one of the most successful men that have grown up in the area that I have and still have that question over my head for a very long time. Why didn't you move on? You know, you ask that to normal people, right? But to me, to get to where I was took longer than it should have. So when people say that out loud, they don't understand the pain that goes through, that long traveled road. So if I go to this other place, will the same thing happen for another decade or two, which I don't have left? I got grandbabies now.
Well, and it's sometimes, and I'm going to be a bit more frank. I know this is part of the job of an ally, I think, as well, right? Like we had in my local community D&I meeting, and you always have these people that want to get up and say, "Well, I think everybody's nice in this town, so isn't it better?" And it's, you have to look at those people in my mind, and I think it's my responsibility as a white man last time to be the one who stands up and says this, and it's like, that's your privilege. The fact that
Yeah,
you think that this doesn't happen, the fact that you think that you making your kid happier is going to take away what's happening to someone else's child, that's privilege.
that's right. I still to this day, Mark, explain white privilege to my wife and my mother. I understand that and we talked about it, and they're harder conversations as you get older, but she made me believe things without really understanding what was going to happen. And the pain was there for her too, going through that, seeing her child being treated differently. But what I said to my wife is, when we walk in the store, more heads turn to me than you. It's the simplicity of white privilege. If that doesn't get in the way of what you're trying to do or getting ahead. But what we're talking about is something that's so broken that over the last 15, 20 years, percentages aren't moving. When you're looking at schooling, if you say, well, I don't have a problem with them, but I definitely wouldn't want to live in the same area as they do. Those things are privilege. The fact that you don't want to drive down that road, but it's okay for people to live there and sleep at night. That's the part that just seems hard for people to grasp. And I think what they want to do is become defensive, because when you use racist words like that, they look at it as a label. And sometimes it's an action, but it's a conglomerate of what's gone on for hundreds of years that not all of them were a part of. But if you're not part of the solution, you are part of the problem, to your focus as far as being an ally. If you won't say anything when everybody else doesn't, then I'm still that black guy in the corner of the room where 9 others are laughing at something that they shouldn't be. And there's nobody for me to tell.
So you would have loved, James, the other weekend. My wife hosted a women's right rally in our town, and she started with the sentence that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Because when she went to hold a women's right march in our community, and it's the same thing, the local mayor in our town, when my wife went to run this women's right rally, said, "Hey, you're in the wrong town. That's not a problem here." And what does that mean? Right? But this is what's wonderful about it. And I think you would appreciate this. This 85-year-old woman came up to me while I was setting up some stuff around the rally. And she said to me, I had to come because I didn't believe it. I grew up here and nothing like this ever happens in this town. They never have rallies. They never speak up. So I couldn't believe that there'd actually be a rally here. And so, making those inroads. And we had 2 people that were counter protesting across the street. That made us feel super legit. Like, I think they thought they were like negative energy, but it's like, oh, cool, you care enough. We are ruffling some feathers. That's good. I'm glad
It's the
you're
perfect
here.
sign. I mean, I think what we do is we try to break oppression up so that it's easier to try to fix, and it just makes it more complicated. Even those who are oppressed at times find certain groups that they don't really signify with, and that's okay, right? You don't have to, but you have to respect who they are. So, I've had conversations with my own people that say, you can't do that, because then it's okay when you're the oppressed as well. So this rally together is the only way to really get back to where we need to be, or to some sort of norm. Because if we try to break these off, or, well, it's okay if it's not me, as long as it's them. In my conversations, I talk about Island Pacific, it's, the Indian and everything that they've gone through, LGBTQ, every group. Because if you start, you're not going to catch it all the time. But in the process, if you mention a realm of it, a lot more people will understand what we're fighting for, instead of looking at themselves as separate entities that are dealing with oppression.
So, James, this was a wonderful conversation. Always love getting to catch up with you. I think everyone, I know this is the first episode, but I'm just going to tell you right now, you can expect James to be back. Hopefully he will be willing to co-host if we got some cool guests on here. But we're going to dive deeper into some of these topics, and I would tell you to plan for us to talk about what we're going to be doing in the community, because we're not going to just talk about it. We're going to do it. So, James, thank you so much for joining us today.
My amazing brother from another mother. We will be together a whole lot more, man. We got big things to do. And as long as we can continue to stay passionate about it and get people to listen, based on the conversations we've always had, I continue to believe in what's next. And you make me a believer in change based on who you are and what you stand for, brother. I appreciate you. And I appreciate the team for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us, James. Really appreciate you.
All right. Take care, everybody.